could anybody ever compete with Disney? There's a certain magic, a special charm with just about each full-length animated feature that has graced theater screens for generations. Hell, I'm sure a few people out there even actually like The Black Cauldron, but the sad truth of the matter is that there's just some features that are better than others. There's ones that were supposedly pretty good, and I'm afraid I don't fully understand why people necessarily thought that. I sat down to watch Atlantis, The Lost Empire, Disney's PG-rated animated release from the year 2001, and I'd heard a lot of people saying they really liked it, and me not having seen it yet, I got really excited. In the end, however, I found myself strangely disappointed. I mostly wanted to discuss this because I felt so let down that I just sort of wanted to see if there was anybody else out there who was in the same boat I was. I typically wouldn't go out of my way to outright bash a Disney feature, but if you'll give me the chance, maybe I can at least get you to understand where I'm coming from. Atlantis is stylistically very different from many other animated Disney features. You can very visibly tell that by this point, Disney has started practicing a more limited style of animation. Fewer frames per second, more integrated cell shading CG, and more cartoony, easy to redraw, squared off character designs. From a business standpoint, it makes perfect sense to be able to pump out a quality movie faster and cheaper than previously thought, but it's sort of a shame to see that attention to detail slowly disappear. The movie starts off in the mythical city of Atlantis, where some kind of a war seems to be going down. This presumably is what sinks the city of Atlantis. Okay, not much explanation here, but I can only assume that we're going to get more information later. Soon we're taken to Washington, D.C. in the year 1914, where Milo, voiced by Michael J. Fox, is laboriously attempting to convince a group of historians to aid him in researching and discovering the great, lost, highly technologically advanced city of Atlantis. He's convinced that through all his research, there's a book that will give him the last clues he needs, hidden somewhere in Iceland. Wait, he slides across the blackboard, erasing what was drawn there, but steps back into place to fill in the map. Shouldn't it not work like that? Shouldn't the erasure be backward? Whatever, that's not important. The important part is that there doesn't appear to be a single person who takes him seriously, and they avoid him at every turn.
I swear that young Tatch gets crazier every year.
Oh, hey there, Jim Cummings. Anyway, after getting dissed, some woman shows up and makes all his dreams come true.
Ho, ho, ho.
No. She takes him to a manor on a dark and stormy night to make a business proposition. Let me guess. Because this is a dark and stormy night, the business proposition isn't nearly as good as it sounds, is it? Well, it sounds pretty okay, actually. In fact, a little too okay. See, Milo lost his granddad in an expedition searching for Atlantis too, of course. Well, it turns out he's here to meet some guy who went on expeditions with Milo's grandfather, and he hands Milo exactly what he was looking for the whole time.
It can't be. It's the Shepherd's Journal. Where was it?
Iceland.
What, we don't even get to see Milo's courageous expedition to get the most important piece in discovering Atlantis? It's just handed to him because somebody else did all the work? Next, he's given everything he could possibly ask for in order to complete his mission.
But Mr. Whitmore, in order to do what you're proposing, you're gonna need a crew.
Taken care of.
You'll need engineers and geologists.
Got 'em all. Best of the best.
All right. Okay, I have to quit my job.
It's done. You resigned this afternoon.
I did?
Yep, don't like to leave loose ends.
My apartment. I'm gonna have to give notice.
Taken care of.
My clothes?
Packed.
My books?
In storage.
My cat? My gosh.
Holy cow, you have no idea how much this upsets me. Milo didn't have to do a shred of work. He is handed literally everything he needs in order to fulfill his mission of discovering Atlantis, and he didn't have to do hardly a single thing. This is just one of the many events in this movie that convinces me that Milo is a Mary Sue character. Some writer out there was probably pissed that he kept getting the shaft on some business idea and then decided, you know what would be awesome? If I suddenly got everything I ever wanted. Yeah, that'd really show him. And thus, Milo was born. Sheesh, it makes me sad that Michael J. Fox is playing the role. We're slowly introduced to each of the supporting characters, each of which has some personality problem of some variety.
Cinnamon, oregano, cilantro. What in a cockadoodle? Cilantro.
Garden powder, nitroglycerin, notepads, fuses, wicks, glue, and paper clips, big ones.
England must never merge with France.
What's it doing in my bed?
You ask too many questions. Who are you? Who said you speak up? Me?
It's like the movie is expecting me to see Milo as the most normal, deserving guy in the movie. Frankly, I'm not a fan of a leading role where the character has a total of 0 flaws to be found, and being slightly nerdy and only mildly, not cripplingly awkward doesn't count. Only one guy Milo gets introduced to seems normal, and that's Commander Rourke. Oh, and by the way, if you can't tell he's one of our antagonists right off the bat, you're blind as hell. The movie just makes the whole thing incredibly obvious. Or maybe that's just me. The awesome boat makes its descent into the Atlantic Ocean. Milo uses the book, which, by the way, only he can read because he's apparently the only person who's ever studied Atlantean, ever, and is able to lead them straight into everywhere they need to go, exactly. Except for the fact that a huge Leviathan attacks, killing almost the entire crew of the ship. Luckily, all of the important people on the expedition survived. Well, isn't that convenient and fortunate? And so, on they go with their expedition. Unfortunately, a vehicle breaks down along the way, and when the team's expert mechanic Audrey can't fix the damn thing, guess who can?
Hey, what'd you do?
Well, you know, the boiler in this baby is a Humac model P54/A13. Now, we got the 814 back at the museum. The heating cores on the whole Humac line have always been a little, temperamental, so sometimes you gotta, boom, persuade them a little.
Are you serious? I mean, I know Milo worked down in a boiler room in the museum and all, but is there nothing he isn't capable of?
Cartographer, linguist, plumber. Hard to believe he's still single.
Even the movie can't believe how good he is at everything. This is ridiculous! Now comes the part where we learn all the little pieces of backstory about each of the characters as quickly as possible. You know, so we can get back to talking about just how amazing Milo is at discovering Atlantis.
Born and raised with him. My father was an army medic. He settled down in the Kansas Territory after he met my mother.
Well, I took this job when my dad retired. But the funny thing was, he always wanted sons, right? One to run his machine shop, and the other to be middleweight boxing champion. But he got my sister and me instead.
I sleep in the nude.
But what about you, Milo? What's your story?
I never got to meet your grandfather. What was he like?
Where do you start? He was like a father to me, really. My parents died when I was a little kid, and he took me in.
Oh, are you serious? You're amazing at everything and your parents are dead? Movie, just how cliched are you planning on getting? I've never seen a more blatant Hollywood Gary Stu in all of my life. Oh god, fireflies! No, really, fireflies! After running from sudden fire deep in the caves, the expedition team discovers themselves to be inside a dormant volcano. They figure that when they're ready, this will be their ride back up to the surface of the Earth. Let me guess, this is where the end of the movie takes place, right? But for some reason, Milo isn't with the expedition. Instead, he's getting discovered by hot women who speak gibberish and have magical healing powers. And when they run off, he follows them all the way to the outer edge of, you guessed it, Atlantis. When the Atlanteans start questioning them in their native tongue, Milo, of course, knows how to speak Atlantean pretty decently. But not only do they speak Atlantean, but...
Juego nos pridos es esanen.
Ida sumice viator.
This is linguam Romae.
Parlez-vous français?
Oui, monsieur.
They speak my language.
How do they know all these languages?
Their language must be based on a root dialect. It's just like the Tower of Babel.
Hold on. Back the trolley up here a second. There's no way on earth Atlantean is a root dialect for all of these other languages. Too many languages around the world are too tremendously different from one another for that to make any sense. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Atlantean forms the root of all languages, right? Why should that mean that Atlanteans automatically also speak every language? How would they ever know every language? How does that even make any sense at all whatsoever? It isn't like Atlanteans invented all these languages, not even all the Western ones. Or, movie, are you insinuating that they did invent every language? Please, forgive me, but that's just complete and utter crap. all just to more easily move the story along without Milo actually having to do any work. Jeez, this is so bogus. By the way, the commander and his lady are bad guys. Foreshadowing! Moving on, our main characters are introduced to the King of Atlantis, King Leonard Nimoy. King Spock tells the explorers to leave the next day. When they leave the room, the king and his daughter Kida curiously start arguing with one another in English.
Your heart has softened, Kida. 1,000 years ago, you would have slain them on sight.
1,000 years ago, the streets were lit, and our people did not have to scavenge for food at the edge of a crumbling city.
Oh, so wait, all that junk at the beginning of the movie happened 1,000 years ago? So how old is Kida? Like 1,100?
What are you telling me? Do you remember because you were there? No, that's impossible because, I mean, that would make you, 85, 88, 100 years old.
Yes?
Oh, well, hey, looking good.
Holy hell! Yeah, there's every anime fanboy's Gary Stu dream. A hot girl with a gorgeous teenager body who's actually thousands of years old, so she's technically legal, so having the hots for her is totally okay. Sure it is, Milo. You just keep telling yourself that. Oh, and wait a second. Just a second ago, she said it happened 1,000 years ago? Suddenly she's saying she is 8,800? Which is it, Kida? Because those numbers are so far apart that they can't possibly be both. Also, luckily for Milo, she's just as curious about him and his people as he is about her and her people. Of course, how else are they going to get the bland, normal character to end up with a sexy magician girl in the end?
Right here. You can read this.
Yes, I can read Atlantean just like you. You can't, can you?
No one can. Such knowledge has been lost to us since the time of the Maybermok.
Oh, the Great Flood.
Oh, right. You can't read. Maybe that's why you also can't count. Wait, hold on again. You can't read? Why? So your civilization lost the ability to read when this big disaster happened however many thousands of years ago? But you were alive for it, right? You were kinda young and all, but you didn't even know the beginnings of how to read? What about your dad, King Spock, over here? Just how old is he? Are you telling me he also doesn't know how to read? That he never taught you how to read and write and count? What about any of the other numerous Atlanteans out there who are surely your age or older, who most likely survived the disaster? Did they all just decide to quit reading and writing? I mean, maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe a lot of books were destroyed in said disaster. But does that just immediately mean that nobody knows how to write new books? I mean, your people, for some crazy retarded reason, know just about every language on Earth, and yet you don't know how to read or write. Does anybody else see the massive, gaping, gushing plot hole presented to us here? And it isn't as though the language doesn't still present itself to the Atlanteans every day or anything, because once Kida finds out Milo can read Atlantean, she takes him all over Atlantis to read inscriptions on pillars and junk and tell her what they say. Also, nobody seems to know how those flying motorcycles work anymore, until Milo comes along and tells them how to use them. Why? Obviously, people were using them in that whole Great Flood or whatever. And again, it falls under the exact same major problem as with the language. Surely there's still somebody alive who knows how to run and operate them. There is no reason why all of this culture should be lost on these people. You know what? I think Atlanteans just quit trying. Like they just got lazy, gave up. Atlanteans, you have no one to blame but yourself. Anyway, after reading a bunch of historical writings, Milo comes to the conclusion that whatever it is they're all searching for, the mythical power source and the magical glow that saved Atlantis from being completely destroyed thousands of years ago, was some kind of crazy crystal, like the one Kida still has hanging around her neck. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly the information our two antagonists were searching for. Who didn't see that one coming? Turns out the commander had removed a single page from the book that talked about where the crystal was located. After muscling his way through things and pressing Milo to read the passages on the page, they find the heart of Atlantis. Suddenly, Kida reenacts just about every anime in existence for no particularly describable reason. Then, as Kida comes back down looking like Terra's Esper form from Final Fantasy VI, the baddies lock her away with plans to take her back to the surface and make a fortune on her. But all the unimportant side characters decide finally not to play along, and now, only now, does the king decide to tell everybody about what the crystals are all about.
In times of danger, the crystal would choose a host, one of royal blood, to protect itself and its people. In my arrogance, I sought to use it as a weapon of war, but its power proved too great to control. It overwhelmed us and led to our destruction.
That's why you hid it beneath the city, to keep history from repeating itself.
Wow, it sure would have been helpful for your people to have known this centuries ago! You want to keep history from repeating itself? Then tell people about what the crystal does! Don't just hide the damn thing away! So then, just before the king dies from some kind of internal bleeding, he hands his royal crystal over to Milo. Wait, does that mean he just made Milo the king of Atlantis? I'm so confused.
My burden would have become hers when the time was right. But now, it falls to you.
Me?
Does Milo seriously just get everything? Who on earth wouldn't want to be Milo right about now?
Well, I think we've seen how effective my decisions have been. Let's recap. I lead a band of plundering vandals to the greatest archaeological find in recorded history, thus enabling the kidnap and/or murder of the royal family. Not to mention personally delivering the most powerful force known to man into the hands of a mercenary nutcase who's probably gonna sell it to the Kaiser. Have I left anything out?
Well, you did set the camp on fire and drop us down that big hole.
Thank you.
You know, I love how the movie is trying to convince me in this scene that Milo was naive enough to let some bad things happen, but at the same time, I just don't feel like it evens out just how much was just handed to him without working hard at it. Really, this just feels more like a bump in the road for him than a particularly massive problem. Because, come on, everything's fallen right into his lap at this point, so I'm sure he's just gonna come through and save the day without too much further hassle, right? He teaches all of Atlantis how to ride those flying motorcycles, and that apparently includes his expedition team, who doesn't even have crystals to activate them with. Yeah, figure that one out. And a final battle takes place. Guess where? Inside the dormant volcano, of course. I don't fully understand why cutting the commander with the crystal had this particular effect on him, but hey, he's very plainly dead now. And what with all the explosive fighting, the volcano blows. Milo carts Kita back into Atlantis, where she uses her magical Atlantis crystal powers to summon rock giants to protect the city once more. Okay, sure. There's plenty of other not very well explained stuff in this movie, so why not? Afterward, Kita is totally 100% okay. But why? When her mother was chosen to protect the city from the last great disaster, she didn't come back. So why was Kita lucky enough to survive it? I don't understand! Milo decides to stay behind in Atlantis, where there's a very teary goodbye with all the characters that didn't really matter terribly much. So in the end, the expedition team hides the fact that they found Atlantis at all, and decides to claim Milo went missing. Milo writes a goodbye note to the organizer on his one and only photo of him and his grandfather. You know what? That's just stupid. It's the one important memory of his family and the outside world he still had. They obviously had photo paper. Could he not just write a note on that same photo paper or something, and not on that pre-existing photo? What an idiot! And so our hero gets everything he wants, gets a gorgeous girl that he may or may not spend several thousands of years together with, depending on what the crystal does to him, chooses to spend the rest of his life in a magic fairy tale land where he's likely the new king or something, and never worries about anything ever again. At least, presumably, not until the sequel, which, screw that, I don't really care what happens in the sequel. Can you see why it is I found myself completely disbelieving everything that happens in this movie? It isn't just because of the magical, mythical stuff that happens. I mean, all that you kind of have to turn your brain off for anyway. But frankly, there's all the lack of attention to detail and the fact that the main character gets everything he wants without having to lift a finger. This is fan fiction at its worst, right up there with Twilight, and I don't doubt that the character of Milo is basically a self-insertion character from one of the Disney staffers. I really don't. If nothing else, Atlantis, the Lost Empire, had its pretty moments to look at and its interesting choice of voice cast. Hell, even Jim Varney voiced for it as one of his final roles before his death. but that's just about as much credit as I can really give it. Usually, if a movie has a couple of flaws, I can overlook them, but for some reason I found myself ridiculously disappointed and unable to just sit back and enjoy it the way I thought I should have been able to do. I guess, to be fair, maybe not everybody loved the movie the way I'd always thought they had. I'd always had these friends tell me they really liked it, but it seems like the popular opinion online through IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic is that it wasn't nearly as good as it should have been. Anyway, sorry to take up your time, folks. I just found myself so surprisingly let down that, well, I just had to tell somebody. Sorry it had to be you.